Well, good morning. There we go. Good morning. It is Saturday, September 21st. I'm here with Now, and we're at my new friend David's house in Santa Fe. We're here for the High Desert Human
Design
Conference. And why am I struggling for words all of a sudden? I'm tired today.
And I'm at the conference virtually.
Pardon me?
I'm at the conference virtually.
You are. And you've done 2 sessions so far? You got another one?
2 so far, and they are available on YouTube. And doing another one today. Today is about my time with Ra, and I will share the science, the statistics that I got from the study on 30,000. And I'll talk about the other 15,000 that I've done readings on. And tomorrow is just question and answer. So probably more of what we're going to be doing today.
I got to tell you, so I think I sent you this as a text earlier in the week, but when I attended your session on today's Saturday, Thursday, I guess, and I was in Jonah's house in one of the back rooms there, and it almost became like a comedy because you were sharing all these profound insights, but every time you would say, now this is really interesting, the internet feed would cut out for like 10 seconds, or you should focus on this, and then it cut out. So the good news, I think it got caught in the recording, but it was just like one time after another. As soon as you said, this is interesting.
Maybe it was protecting the brains of the people whose brains would have exploded with the new information.
Possibly, yeah. Well, and I've seen some of that content before with the tarot incorporated in the channels, but like definitely resonated like seeing it a second time. So yeah. Cool.
It's important to see it multiple times. I've seen it so many times and studied it so intensively. And yet every time I go back through it, I see more. And now, as I am going through the Tree of Life for my classes and realizing that unless we integrate the Tree of Life into the body graph, we're missing huge pieces of information that Ra didn't have, wasn't really interested in exploring. Ra was not a researcher, and he was not intellectual. And I never saw him pick up a book. And I saw no books in his house. There were a few astrology, Ambusha, Ambusha, is that her? Was that her? Yeah. She was Ra's wife was an astrologer of sorts. And so there were some astrology magazines, just Mountain Astrologer. But the only thing I ever saw in his house was a Uline catalog that was in his bathroom.
Okay.
But was Ra
little personal tidbit.
Was Ra a channel? Because the understanding within the human design community is that the material was channeled, and so there was not necessarily a need for him to study. Could you speak a little more on that?
I channel, but if you're going to channel in a responsible way, you check your information. And Ra had a lot of misinformation, especially medical. Who's joining us?
Kealy.
Oh, Kealy. We've all been hitting our heads on this.
It's this lamp here.
This lamp.
Oh my.
Sure.
Did it 5 times last night.
I understand about that. When we moved into this house, there was a chandelier in the kitchen, and it was sort of, they must have had a kitchen table under it because it was just hanging in the middle there. Needless to say, we gutted the kitchen. Big time, gutted the kitchen. Kealy, how are you doing?
I'm wonderful. I cannot express the experience here. It's more than I could have ever dreamed.
Oh, good.
Hmm.
Good.
So I'm feeling, I just got from, came from Qigong, so I'm pretty energized right now.
I know that one. We do Tai Chi Gong every day.
Oh, you know
So-
what would be an interesting, I don't mean to interrupt. We have, of course, the three of us here right now, in Aura in person. And I would love to hear your thoughts, Dr. Eleanor, on what happens when groups of people get together, what happens to the group aura.
It depends on the people
Yeah,
and their choice.
yeah.
You know, you can be in a group of people and seal your aura.
Mm.
And you can be in a group of people and be completely unconscious about what you're picking up.
Mm.
And then that would change your aura. So I never, you know, I'm a clinician and I've worked with groups extensively. I've done many different kinds of groups. In my practice, starting in 1977, I did 10 years of groups that met from Friday evening till Sunday evening with only like a 10-hour break between sessions. And those were psychological groups. I generally had 30 to 40 people, and I did them every 6 weeks for 10 years. And the transformations were amazing because I used whatever was going to work. Sometimes we would do active meditation. Sometimes we would do hypnosis. Sometimes I would design something. One group, I had people playing Monopoly, and I had them playing it. I put 5 people on a Monopoly game. We had 10 Monopoly games going, and there were 5 people per game. And I'd say to one group, I want you to play a friendly game where you help each other. Another group, I would say, play a competitive game. And then I would mix it up so people could have the experience of how their own choice and their own way of wanting to play a game would affect the whole. And it was profound. One group, I sent the men out on a hike, and I had the women cook dinner. Another time, I had the women go out on a hike, and the men cook dinner. And the idea was for people to experience different roles that they play and to have the experience of how that affects not only themselves, but the collective. And so when you ask about like the 3 of you, I can see the blending of your auras, but I can also see where you've kept privacy. And those people are not in your aura. So there's not a rule. It's very individual. And I did not study nor think that Ra's information of the Penta was worth studying. And then I listened to some of the videos, and I think it's hogwash. I do not believe that when 3 people come together, a different entity is formed. You keep yourself. You are a divine being, and you contribute, but you don't disappear. And, you know, a group, you know, I heard in one of the videos that if you have such and such channel, it contaminates or ruins the penta. Bullshit is that?
Mm.
To disempower people, to tell them they need something that they can never get unless they relate in a certain way. I'm sorry. I don't see that clinically in my work. So, you know, I've been a clinician, a psychologist for 50 years, and I haven't ever stopped studying because no one thing fits all psychological situations. And so that's why I work in the four worlds now, is because as a clinician working with clients, when I had a couple who were in trouble, and most of the couples I saw were in trouble, I needed to find a way they could communicate that would bridge the disconnect. So they needed to be in the same world. If one person is in a mental world and the other person is in a spiritual world, they're going like this, and the communication is going like that. And the relationship can't overcome that. So part of my mission right now has nothing to do with noble energy maps. It has to do with opening the culture to understand that we've been deceived to think that we live in a Freudian oriented unconscious world. We live in a world where we're conscious, and every person I've ever worked with knew who they were, knew their spirit, and the pain was it not being recognized. And that goes for manifesting generators and projectors and reflect. It doesn't matter. We live in a society that has not valued spirit. And if we're not living from who we are, we're not living. So sorry about the rant, but you're all individuals, and you come together bringing to the relationship what you choose to bring. And what you choose not to bring, you hold dear inside yourself and you don't discuss it. It's private. And that can come from many different places, from fear, from integrity, from anxiety, from waiting for the right moment. How do we know why somebody does something if we don't get in and get to the core of their trust and what they want to tell us? So, you know, Ra has nice stories, really good stories, and they sell. But selling stories is not selling health. And my commitment as a social scientist and psychologist has been to truth. Because when I was at the University of Chicago, unfortunately, it was a time when the government was giving out a lot of funding. And I saw my professors fudge data. 3 of them, not just one of them, 3 of them fudged data to get money from Head Start or grants or whatever. And sorry, that's not the way I do business. So I'm just doing my work, you know?
So is
So
there,
where do you want to go?
I was just going to ask, is there a place for the story?
Which stories?
Or storytelling in general?
Yes,
Like
but
what?
the stories have to have truth
Okay.
and disclosure.
And where does that truth come from?
Science. That's honest. Data, clinical work. I would not know how important the four worlds are if I hadn't been testing it out clinically. So, for example, when I was president of the Hypnosis Society, which was a clinical hypnosis society. So in order to study hypnosis, you had to be licensed. So I was teaching licensed professionals. And what I began to teach them that none of them knew was clean language. That accesses the spiritual core. And I was teaching that. I was president for 2 years. We had monthly meetings, and then we had quarterly trainings. The trainings were a whole weekend, and they were always at my house because we could fit 100 people in my living room. So we were training people. I was training them on going into the unconscious and talking directly to it. But many of the hypnotherapists were using NLP, kinesthetic, visual, or auditory, and using that as a way in. So they were bypassing the spirit.
So NLP bypasses the spirit.
Oh, it does. NLP is aimed at mental world communication.
Okay.
Claiming to touch the unconscious, but you're not going to touch the unconscious if you're talking in a modality that leaves out the other modalities. And one of my clients works not just with the three, but also expanded it to sublayers of how people think.
So could you explain what the three is?
Well, the three is the auditory, kinesthetic, and visual. And then you break those down into further delineations. So in the four worlds, each world has its own communication. And you want to know where somebody is psychologically before you open Pandora's box. You know, coaching people when you're trained for a weekend, in my view, is irresponsible. You know, I've had 1,500 hours of supervised training doing therapy in my internship, and 15 hours of research in my PhD, or if not more. And I'm still learning. So if somebody thinks they can learn what to do in a weekend, no, they can't. And so for people who want to do readings, I think the important aspect is to learn how to do them in a way that empowers the other and does not label them. Because when somebody has a label, like the big one, people have been told they're stubborn.
No, isn't there a balance between empowering and being constructive so somebody doesn't get too heady about it? Or, think too, oh, this is wonderful. This is where things are going, because people can get in that.
You don't want to be irresponsible in what you're doing, but you also want to listen to where the person is. Some people are so broken when they come for a reading that any caution to them may be taken as a negative in their mind. And And you always want to ask what they want to have happen in the reading. What are they working on?
Mhm.
And what do they know? You know, I tend, when I'm doing readings, to validate with my clients that what I've said is resonating. And if it's not, I reframe it. So we have a sacred trust when we're working with people. And I take that pretty seriously. I think you all know that.
Yep.
Well, are there ever times where a client's truth or a client's desires runs counter to what you or what a clinician in general would want for the client? I hope that question.
The clinician doesn't want anything for the client.
Okay.
The clinician wants the client to want what the client wants.
That's beautiful.
And then we serve the client. And I've never run a traditional practice because I want to be accessible to my clients when they need me. And I've worked with some pretty disturbed people, borderlines. I've worked with psychotic people. I've worked with 1 or 2 child molesters. When I was doing sex therapy with clients, some of them were in serious difficulty. And when people are going through a crisis, they need access. Nowadays in the medical field, there is no access. And even when you're in a visit with a medical doctor, more often than not, they're at the computer and they don't even examine the patient. We went to an orthopedic doctor 2 weeks ago. I had hurt my knee and Marvin had hurt his hip. He touched my knee and he said, "Oh, it's still a little swollen." I didn't go for physical therapy. I didn't want to take the time. I'm back to swimming. It's healing. I'm healing it. But Marvin's hip was a more serious issue that needs an MRI. And he couldn't get the MRI. But the doctor did not even touch his hip. He said, "You know, we're not going to do anything. We need the MRI." But he didn't examine him. He didn't touch him. He sat, told us stories about why he needed data. And as we were leaving, Marvin was so upset because he was in pain. That night, he hadn't slept. So I said to him, "Why don't you go to a different physical therapist?" So he looked somebody up, God's hand, somebody in our neighborhood, went to the physical therapist who does acupuncture, needling, cupping, and within an hour, he was better. But for an orthopedist to not even touch to see, is it swollen? Is it more painful? Is it worse than it was the first time? That's not medical care. So Marvin and I have always done our practices differently. We worked at home so people could see we live the way we say they could live. Sean experienced that, I think. I don't think there's a big difference between who I say I am and who you experience when you're with me. Is that true?
You're pretty consistent. Despite Osho saying you were divinely inconsistent, right? Wasn't that your name?
Yeah, but I am. Because if I see something that warrants changing, I change.
Mhm.
I'm not attached to anything except what I know to be true. And proving it. because I grew up in a psychic family, and you can't measure that. You know, the phone would ring and my mother would say, "Oh, I knew you were going to call." Or my sister would have a precognitive experience and get completely hysterical that she knew something before it happened. It's scary. And she was so afraid of it that I knew that if I was ever going to survive in the academic world with my esoteric knowledge, I needed a PhD. It's that simple. You do the work, you do your homework, and then you can play and you can be creative. But you have to be grounded.
Well, I'd like to ask a question about, I believe it's called consensual validation. So you are psychic, you are intuitive, you know things. Why is it necessary to validate that inner knowing scientifically?
Because you could be wrong. And I can say without a doubt that many of the things in the field of psychology said about people are wrong. And when it's wrong and it disempowers someone, I don't use it. You know, I'm not going to ask a couple in a crisis to use skills that I know would set them off. And it's only through study and my experience with the work that I can say what works and what doesn't work. When I began, after some of my big Kundalini experiences, when I would be sitting with a patient and they'd be telling me something and I'd know more about the incident than what they were telling me, I needed to be able to validate when the feeling was real and when I knew because I knew because I knew versus when I thought I knew. And there's a whole different energy in that. And I worked really hard for 5 years to turn off my psychic abilities. Because when I'm looking at the three of you, I don't want to be looking at your auras and intruding on your space without permission. And I was at a point where I could not control it. In fact, I have a client now who told me last week when I said to him, "So are you doing your transcendental meditation?" And he said, no. He stopped doing it because he could not control his transcending. And so the TM people said to stop doing it. I wouldn't tell him to stop doing it. I would tell him how to manage it. They basically said to him, stop being conscious. I mean, I've also seen projectors whose life has been ruined by being told they're a projector.
So there's this element of taking responsibility for the way that someone else may interpret your words.
Well, you're not taking responsibility for how they interpret it. You're taking responsibility for how you use your words, so they're not misinterpreted.
Okay.
You know, any of us who do readings, we're dealing with general population who know nothing. And so when you become an authority, you have a responsibility to not misuse it. And, you know, I would apply that to parenting as well. You know, one of my early tasks in my practice was to help parents of young children, because I knew that in all of my training, nobody told me how to deal with my kids. And I didn't know what to do when they said to me, we want to eat ice cream for breakfast, or we don't want to wear a hat, or they'd have a tantrum because I wouldn't give them something they wanted. And as a parent, where do you learn the skills to use to not hurt their soul while you're setting a boundary? So as soon as I realized that I hadn't learned practical skills in my training, I went and got the practical skills. But as responsible professionals, that's what we do.
So at what point is someone ready to help a client, to start taking clients? I mean, you're saying that you're always learning as clinicians or as practitioners. We're always learning, always improving. But
Therefore, you never put anything out as hard and fast. You always give your client an opening to say they disagree, they experience it differently, and then you go with what they tell you. You're client-centered, not self-centered, because your ego has no place in the work.
What happens when you are sensing a disconnect between, how do I want to phrase this? You are seeing intuitively a part of the client that they don't recognize.
You have to know, if when you see that intuitively, whether you're right on or you're not. And that's something you need to know within yourself, that when a client says, you let go of your perception. You might be right, but until the client confirms that missing piece, you don't go there with them, because it could cause an abreaction. And, you know, you have to respect the integrity of the ego, of the conscious mental world mind. And for some people, spirit is very scary. And guiding them in a way where they could be empowered is very scary. So you need to be careful.
I'm going to circle back to the question that I had earlier.
I'm going to close my door because I hear Marvin listening to something, and it's not this.
Dogs are quiet today.
He's clearly listening to something that I did, but I don't know what it is. Whatever it is, he'll tell me later.
Yeah. I'd like to circle back to the discussion about your more difficult clients, so the ones who were experiencing psychosis, or had some very serious issues. I think what I want to ask you about that is what are there clients who are so disturbed that their truth how do you guys want to help me? What am I trying to ask here? Is there objectively, are there
people I wouldn't do a reading on? Yes.
Okay. What they want for themselves is just not, it's not
In line.
in line with your core values, who you are spiritually. I hope that makes sense.
It's not about me when I'm with a client. It's about them. It's about, if I'm reading a chart, it's about the chart. I don't bring my person into that reading. I read what's in front of me.
Okay.
And I assess who the client is in front of me and at what level they're asking for information. And that's a clinical judgment that takes experience. And there are some people who I wouldn't even, I mean, for example, I have one client. I've looked at his chart. I've never mentioned it to him. My intake form asks for date, time, and place of birth. I've had several people say, why do you want my time? And I say, well, I'm an astrologer and I like that information. But some people, I wouldn't even attempt to do a reading because it would scare the hell out of them. And I use the information to be informed about what they're facing in their energy. And it's helpful. But I do charts on every single person who comes through my office.
I guess if I can ask a very frank question, are there clients that are, again, I hate to put it this way, but beyond help or?
Yes.
Okay. And is that a spiritual misalignment?
No, sometimes it's physiologic.
Okay.
I had one young man who was the most negative patient I ever had. And his presenting complaint was that when he was in college, he smoked a joint and it fried his brain. And he was never the same and he could never think after that. And it was true. I mean, marijuana in teenagers can fry their brain. And it can cause them to never feel like themselves again. And there was no way in, zero way in. I worked with him for many years. It was a physiologic shift that he knew happened. And he was devastated. And no matter what I did to try to heal that, it couldn't heal. He became a lawyer, but I don't know if he ever practiced. After he passed the bar and still claimed he couldn't function, he went to work at a Walgreens or something. And then I lost touch with him. But
So theologically, are we predisposed to some work better with plant medicine than others?
yeah. And, you know, I'm a believer in plant medicine, but not for kids. You know, you have to have a mature neurological system. And the person has to know what they're doing. You know, informed consent. And now you seem to be really struggling with where to put yourself. Is that right?
Yes. I think physically, I'm just trying to position myself in front of the camera. And it does feel like I need, it feels like I'm never quite ready to speak. It always feels like I need more information. I need more information. Like I love, for example, I love sitting here with both of you, with you, Dr. Eleanor. There's this pressure. I feel like I need many, many more hours of studying your material to really engage with you on the level that I would like to. I think that's my struggle is, where do I put myself? Where do I stand with others? How do I do right by myself and my own goals, while relating to others in a way that feels satisfying and fulfilling?
Be in the moment.
Yeah.
And don't worry about it.
Yeah.
You know, you have to trust yourself. And you have to trust your values. So if you know what your spiritual values are, that's the core. And the rest, yeah, intellectual stuff. So it's not about the intellectual stuff. It's about living in truth, living in a way that aligns with who you are and encouraging other people to do the same. And there's no, I don't really care what people do, as long as they're doing what feels aligned with them and doesn't do harm to other people. I mean, we're each on our own path. And my path certainly isn't anybody else's path. And two people can be in the same environment and have completely different experiences. I mean, if you speak to my next oldest sister, she's 2.5 years older than me. If she told you about her childhood and I tell you about my childhood, you'd think we lived in two completely different homes. And if she described her mother and I described my mother, we had two completely different mothers.
I have a younger sister. That's our situation as well. Yeah, raised in the same household. But yeah, very, very different.
And how does that happen? Think about what that is. You know, some of it is astrological, some of it is energetic, some of it is openness. My next oldest sister is extremely sensitive and very smart and extremely competent. And she never felt secure. And I faced many more obstacles than she ever did. And yet, I've always been a happy kid. And she was always an unhappy kid. And at one point when she moved, I said to her, well, it seems like you're really happy where you are. And she said, I don't even know what that word means.
Is there a karmic aspect?
Maybe. But there's also an inner work aspect. How much inner work have I done? And how much inner work has she done?
So the issue of where it comes from, is not always relevant. Am I understanding correctly?
Say that again. What's not relevant?
Where your, let's call them struggles, come from, whether they're karmic or ancestral or, whatever, what have you. It's not as relevant as you being willing to do the inner work.
Look, we don't know the truth about anything in our life. So we could come up with an explanation that makes perfect sense to us, and it could release all of our traumas. And it could be a completely false story. but it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
If it works for the person, it works for the person. So we don't judge. And we don't need to understand another person's process. It's their process.
But that is your one of your criticisms of Ra's human design is that there are a lot of stories being told that are not necessarily true. Is there a place?
If you tell yourself a story and it's not true, that's very different than if you tell another person a story that they believe is true about them and it's not.
I see.
In one case, you're imposing your belief on another person, and in the other case, you're not.
I see.
I have a very beautiful kitten right here. He's here.
See. So
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Like we've talked many times about you're looking for more data, more researchers, more people to help you. What data are you most hungry for right now? And how can people help?
I don't know exactly. I found it very interesting that Name did the statistics on the participants by type, and that 99% of the population, as I believed, are actually manifesting generators. She had 4 generators and 1 projector in the integrated.
And one manifest.
What?
One manifestor. I'm meeting him this afternoon to find out what that's about. So
you can sit here, but no biting, okay? No biting. I have a very beautiful boy, this boy. I don't know what data. I think I would like to design some kind of questionnaire that could be used with clients. And I don't yet know what that is. I am grateful to have the data about the hard data. And what I'd like to do is take Name's statistics and run them through a program to see the level of significance in the differentiated types. And that's easy to do. I don't have the statistical package for the social sciences at this point, but that would probably be a simple t-test or chi-square. And it could be a simple percentage also.
Okay. What did you call
What's
that?
that?
T. You just used some words I've never heard before. T what?
T-test or z-test?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a social scientist. My dissertation had 295 variables, and I did an analysis that had never been done before. It was called a path analysis that shows causality. And what I was studying was religiosity, family interaction patterns, child rearing, and child guilt. And there was no finding in terms of child rearing. And it was the first study that asked the child about their personality instead of asking the parents to describe the child's personality. So I did a very huge study. I had 83 families, mother, father, and child, interviewed for my study. And then I had to code the open-ended questions, hire someone to code them as well, then test to make sure that what I said and she said was reliable. If you're working with data, let's say we're testing the pentas. We would need to see what the configuration was with every penta. And then we would need to, in some way, determine whether that group was more successful in the business world than a group of people who, let's say, 3 manifesting generators got together. And maybe some of them had the crown and the ajna connected and could channel information. Would there be a significant difference in success between the people in the penta and the people who were not in the penta? And until you got whether or not that was significant, you can't say that in order to be successful in business, you have to form a penta. I mean, that's a story. It plays well, but it doesn't mean it's true. So when I talk about doing the research, I'm talking about asking questions and collecting the answers, then coding it so it is measurable, and then doing the actual statistics to see if what you think is significant is significant. Now, when I did that with, and I will share this afternoon, the science, the statistics I got, what I proved without any doubt is that the structure of the body graph is sound. I can say that 100%. The triangle centers had 3 factors. The square centers had 4 factors. That means that if it was the root and there were 4 factors, there were 4 different things you were measuring in that center. And they hung together. They had something in common. If you had a center and nothing was in common, why would you say it held together as a center? So those kinds of things were proven in the statistics, that type held across the matrices. That's pretty profound. Whereas what didn't hold were the channels. What Ra said was circuits did not hold. There were no factors in common. There was no glue holding those channels together as compared to a different channel. And so while some of what Russ said about channels is common sense, other parts of it can't be counted on as science. And the profiles, for example, are a mathematical artifact. The hexagram structure creates the distribution in the population by its very nature. So can we assign meaning to it? I don't think so. It's talking about the structural integrity of the body graph, but it's not talking about an interpretation of what that means. So you're a linguist, computer language, right? You understand that language is assigned, but then we have to see if it holds.
Yeah.
And so I found a lot of things in the body map that did not hold. And what I worked with was what did hold, which is type and how type changes across the matrices. And you asked about consensual validation. When you have physiology with the timing, astrology with the calculations, the body graph with type, all pointing to the same kind of analysis, you know something is true. If different fields come at it and say the same thing, and it holds in that field, then you know you have something you can measure. And that's what the noble energy maps confirmed, is that a human being is not developed fully for 3 months. And at the point that they are developed, we are designed to manifest who we are. And I would say in the thousands of patients I've seen in 50 years, I was doing 40 patients a week for probably 30 years. I don't do that now, but I haven't stopped working that much. But in terms of that number of clients, every single one of them wanted to be known. When they knew who they were and they knew what they wanted it acknowledged and not denied.
Have you been able to create a timeline or an estimation, so to speak, of when a person starts a therapy and when a person's ending a therapy? Do you find that is there an average amount of time that it takes?
I work so fast, Kealy. You know, I have a client, 2 clients. You're in my classes, so you've seen some of them. One client I've had since 1975. We met at a TM retreat. She's not really in therapy. She's in exploration of consciousness because she doesn't need therapy, but she knows that the pain in her life is that no one in her immediate world, not her kids, not her husband, they divorced and then he passed, none of them recognized the spirit. So she always feels alone. And so she works with me because she gets support for who she is. The other client has been with me since 1980. And I haven't seen her in therapy for probably 15 years. But we've stayed in touch because I'm the only one who's recognized her spiritual core and who encouraged her art, her intuition, and legitimized it in her life. So there's different layers. I mean, when children come to see me, it takes 1 or 2 sessions and they're out. You know, they're easy. Couples can be difficult because not all couples are honest about whether they want the relationship or they don't. And so they can be looking for a way out when the intent of the therapy is to keep them in. So I've moved away from that. When a couple has a question, the first thing I do is discernment counseling. I determine whether the relationship is viable or not. Because what's the point of trying to work with them if one person doesn't want to be there? So there's no, I'd say, you know, judging from my webinars, transformations happen pretty quickly. I mean, I've seen some people in the webinar, it doesn't take much, and they're off and running. And there are other people you can work with for years, and they do not want to change. Or if they change, their life is going to fall apart.
Well, that's the scary part for them, right?
Very scary. I mean, we have to assess that in working with people. Are they in a situation where being in the situation is less scary than being out of the situation, even though being in the situation is painful? But the secondary gain of it gives them comfort. So as a therapist, the question is, what do you want to have happen? First question I always start with, what's your goal? If you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get there.
I'm wondering if we could pivot. Do we have enough time?
To do what?
Yeah, you're doing your next presentation in under an hour. So are you good for another half hour or so?
Yeah, I don't care. I don't prepare.
See? She's game.
Yeah.
I know about my relationship with Ra. There's nothing to prepare. This is science, right? I'm just going to tell the story. I was trying to map out the time frame of my relationship with Ra, and that's a little tricky, but I think I have it down. Because I broke with him so many times, and God wouldn't let it go away. And I've tried to get away from design so many times, and God won't let it go away.
Did you have a question now? You wanted to pivot?
I mean, I was going to really pivot and ask about the galactics and the starseed movement, but
Interesting.
I don't know. Do
Go
we want to go there?
I'll
Go
there,
where?
sure.
Yeah.
Into space?
Into space, yes.
Well, I know about space. I've had several encounters.
Where are you from, if I can ask?
I don't know where I'm from, but I know what my planet's like. I don't have a name for it, but I know what it's like where I come from.
Yeah.
We got chills. That was beautiful.
And my son had an ET in his bedroom.
Mm.
And I have a client who has contact every single day.
Mm.
And he updates me. I believe that my first out-of-body, well, I know my first out-of-body experience was when I was 7 and had polio. And I know, well, maybe it was before that, now that I think about it. I have a memory of being wheeled in a buggy by my sister and looking from above. But my first real coherent memory with words is when I had polio. I'd had a spinal tap. I was in a room by myself. Imagine putting a 7-year-old in a room by herself and telling her, don't move, because if you move, you're going to get a terrible headache. And so I went out of my body, and I was over the nursing station watching and listening to them talking about me and where they were going to send me, because I needed to be transferred to a quarantine hospital. I was very fortunate. I had non-paralytic polio. I was sick for 10 days. It was not any worse than, well, the headache was worse, but it wasn't worse than being sick with the flu. And I got out of the hospital after 10 days, and I had no residuals. So I was very, very lucky. But it initiated me into other dimensions. And I was fascinated, and my room at the time was a porch room that had 7 windows, and I could see shadows out the windows. And I also know that there were UFOs around, and I was scared. I went out with Stephen Greer in 1992 to a CE5 expedition to vector in the UFOs. We didn't see any that night, but when I left, my hands were the color of the red behind you. And I became extremely allergic to cold, to the point that I couldn't even open my freezer to take out meat. It was excruciating. If I touched anything cold, my hands would get terribly red and painful. I worked that through. I am a consultant for MUFON, the UFO network, because I've worked with people who have been abducted. And I have used hypnosis to unravel the abduction. I also worked with Dolores Cannon before she was famous, with her typed protocols, doing past life regressions. Marvin remembered being abducted when he was a teenager in a past life regression, and or a hypnotic regression, however you want to say it. And I've always said I know where I come from. I know what it was like there. And when I got my UFO guy, all of his images that were his experiences were ones I had seen and studied. I read the whole Blue Book. I read Majestic 5. I dabbled in the UFO community around 1992. And then in 2004, my son had a gray in his bedroom and a blue light coming out of his palm. He also had an experience in Rhode Island. Charles went to Brown, and my daughter and son-in-law went to Rhode Island School of Design. And they were set to meet at the train station in Rhode Island. And I got a phone. This was before cell phones were common. I had one because I was in the movie business, but they both called me. Do you know, did Charles call you? Did Diane call you? We can't find each other, and we're at the train station. They could not find each other. And it's one staircase. And about an hour later, I got a call from Charles saying that he had been in a car accident on a freeway. He had no idea how he had gotten there. He had missing time, and the damage on his car could not be explained in any mechanical way. And Charles was an electrical engineer and computer scientist, and you could not explain the damage. And he was unscathed, and the car was in the middle of the freeway, and he had no idea. He did not remember driving there. So that was another UFO experience. The car was repaired, and the mechanics said they had no idea how such an accident could have happened. I know that I've had experiences. And I studied, as I've said, pretty hard to know when to let in experiences and when to not let them in. You don't want to be battered around by psychic experiences or abductions without being in your right mind. Mental world comes in handy here. You know, my spirit says, oh, take me away, take me home. And my mind says, you have work to do here.
It's fun being with generators over here. You hear so many guttural sounds.
What? I didn't hear what you said.
I said it's so fun to be next to other generators because we have so many guttural sounds. There's so many over here. It's so fun.
And embodied. We're very embodied.
Yes.
Well, you're all manifesting generators, I believe.
Yeah.
Which means that when you have that kind of confirmation between you, it can empower your movement towards something.
Could we speak a little more about those channels, 34, 20, like the very dense
Oh, the 34, 57, 10, 20?
Yeah, because I do have in my total integrated vehicle all of those.
And which world is which in?
I believe it's in, actually pull out I have my chart here, right here. Thanks to Name. Give me one sec.
She did such a great job.
It's a really beautiful. Thank you, Name. Okay.
Okay, so here's the chart. Option, command, plus. Okay. So you have the 10 in all worlds. Oh, there it is in the postnatal.
The postnatal.
You get the whole thing.
Yep, that was what we were looking for.
That's your struggle.
Yeah. See,
here's the issue. In a nutshell, it takes you 3 months to know what you know.
Yeah.
So you're in process and you're impatient with your process because you know, but you don't know what you know.
Yeah.
And because it's a 3-month process, what you want to do is you want to look at the circuitry that is hooking up. And I'm not talking about Ra's circuitry. I'm talking about your circuitry. Every individual is unique. No two maps are the same. So you want to read the person. So let me share it again. Let me see what else I can see.
I think some part of my process takes like 3 months too. Haven't really integrated that, but
yeah,
there's
well, everyone has their own 3-month process.
Right.
Yeah, but some people, it's more than others.
Yeah.
So because now you see, part of the difficulty you have is that you have an open solar plexus and an open splenic center in every prenatal design. You have it in every in the physical and the emotional worlds postnatally. So, and then in the lunar design, the only thing you really gain in that lunar design is I'm going to say it sort of bluntly, so
Please.
you get it,
Please.
is that you have a 5818, which is understanding, not understanding, it's perceiving frequency and knowing when it's aligned and when it's not. But you also have the 28. And the 28 carries an anxiety of survival and an anxiety of what if I get it wrong? And so you have that, and it's hanging. Now, we need to see if it connects. It doesn't. It looks like it doesn't connect to anything until the postnatal solar, although you came in wanting to be a leader and wanting to know what you know because you know it. And the three central columns make you a very strong sensing of frequency, but you're channeling it and then you don't know what to do with it. And the not knowing what to do with it gives you anxiety because it's about survival. And it's not just about your survival. It's about the survival of the multidimensional consciousness in the manifesting world. And at some core level, you know that because when you set your goals properly and you take it step by step by step, you can, if you had been taught to rely on your intuitive knowing from birth, you would not need to wait the 3 months. But because we are in a society that puts us in the mental world, you've had the experience of being told to trust yourself and what you wanted to do when you had not yet formulated internally the nuances of what you knew you knew. And without the nuances of what you know, you can feel like you're drowning.
So is that a practice? I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Is that a practice that you can work on? If it, if we were intuitive, it wouldn't take the 3 months. So if you become
well, you can be intuitive all you want, but if the people around you have told you not to trust it, then you have an internal conflict.
I did grow up that way. I do know that, I've been very well taken care of. Very fortunate. I do know that, for example, my father, he, at least in the mental world, has most of those gates in, what would you call it? It's in human design, it's called the integration circuit, which I know you don't subscribe to.
Yeah,
that.
you can use those terms. I know what they mean.
Yeah.
I tested them.
Yeah.
And it is an integration. The
Yeah.
reason it's an integration channel is that it's the only channel other than the 15.5. And the 15.5 is an internal channel, not an external channel. So it's the only external manifesting channel that is in all worlds. The 57 in spirit, the 34 in emotional, the 10 in emotional. So you have an emotionally locked in sense of self. When you know who you are and you know what you are, you don't compromise. And people like that, which you're one, when you were bringing up spiritual stuff as a baby, or you were reacting to somebody whose energy didn't strike you right, if that was denied, you learn to not trust yourself. And so you back off the intuitive and the validation of the intuitive because it was invalidated. When my first memory, and this is relevant for you now, my first memory when I was about a month old, I ran it by my Freudian training analyst. I ran it by my Jungian training analyst, and I ran it by all of the psychics I worked with. None of them knew what to do with it. My first memory, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, that's what it was. I was about a month old. We lived in a house, and the kitchen was pretty small. My father was holding me. He was in the eating part of the kitchen. My mother was in the cooking part of the kitchen, and they were having a discussion. I was fine. My father was holding me up, on his shoulder, and he had his hand on my head. And all of a sudden, the energy in the room between them shifted. I have no idea why, but there was tension. So I started squirming. I didn't like the energy. I can still feel it in my body. And they both got more tense, looking for what's wrong with the baby. But there was nothing wrong with the baby except them. Whatever the gift that I was given that day, I knew that they could not perceive what I was expressing. And I stopped expressing it. I did not stop registering it. So I can go through my whole childhood and look at the energy of the people. When I was older, maybe 4, I would say to some of them, "Why are you doing that? I would never do that. I don't want to ever treat anybody like that." And they would get angry at me because I was speaking the truth. Especially my very nasty brother, who was 16 years older. He would come up the steps and say, "I'm going to take the tubes out of the TV." I'd say, "Why? I'm just watching Howdy Doody." "Well, I don't want the TV on." It was terrifying. But I knew that they were unconscious. And it saved my life. Now, I had one sister who tuned in. And my mother would say to people, "Just leave her alone. Let her be. Let her do her thing." And whenever I was in conflict and asked about a decision, my parents would say, "We trust you and we trust your judgment. Do whatever you think is right." Now, not everybody had that. Now, I had a mixed bag, clearly. We all do. But what saved me was being able to register. I can go through my whole childhood and read the energy. But not everybody can. And you learned to not trust yourself. So your task is to get your intuition going again and to test it. You'll know the difference when it's right and when it's not right. Nobody else can tell you, but you can tell yourself. And I would ask your parents about their childhood. I would get the most complete history. Anyone whose parents are still alive, get their history to the iota of every detail you can. And ask about secrets in their... Luke, he's now dropping my heavy crystals down off my bookcase. He finished with all the light ones.
Crystals, my favorite subject.
Now it's my pen. So it's really tricky. And when you've grown up with awareness that's been non-acknowledged or attempted to be conditioned out by denial, it takes courage. For me, it took this guy. Without him, I could not have done it. But don't let it go. Because you're not realizing your potential when you're not using those dimensions of consciousness.
And I've taken God knows how many psychic mediumship development courses, trying to find a way in, or
You
trying to
don't need
find-
a way in. You have the way in.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just a question of shifting the mental attitude, not the spiritual.
Yeah, and that was what I was doing, was approaching it from a mental perspective. Oh, I need this course. Oh, I need that course. I need this person to tell me what to do, because
No, you could tell those people what to do.
Yeah.
But you have to stop going there.
Yeah.
Go to your parents and ask them, do you ever have intuitions?
Mm.
And when you do, then what happens? Use clean language. It's going to be in the document that, which one is it? It's in the Four-World Tree of Life and the Process of Self-Actualization. You have that from class.
Yeah.
So in that one, use the questions starting on page 12. Those are clean questions. And you do not want to ask, when you're speaking to your parents and getting a history, use clean questions.
So I'm
Get
getting,
the genealogy.
Yeah.
Get who in the family did what.
Mm,
When did they come to this country?
mm,
What was that like? Were there any things that they didn't know about? It could, with you, it could be epigenetic or emotional inheritance,
mm. Well, I
one or the other.
did come directly from a war zone, and I have never been able to get the full story. So that's, I mean, I'm just
How
not,
old were they?
they were already adults. So well, my father was coming, just as a quick overview. It's a very long story. My father and a few of our family members came to America in the early 80s, just straight out of what was formerly the Republic of South Vietnam. It is no longer in existence. And there's just a lot of
Grief.
pain, grief. You don't have
Get the story now.
Yeah.
Tell them that the evidence shows that when you don't know your family history, there are things in it that may trip you up psychologically, that if you knew it, could put a piece of a puzzle together for you.
Mm.
And so the more history we get from our family members, and then take it in, what somebody says can be interpreted many different ways. And sometimes things that you take in and feel hurt about, reframe it, because that's the person telling it who told it and interpreted it that way. But you can look at it and turn the crystal and see it a completely different way.
Mm.
So your inner task is to keep turning the crystal until you get your family story.
Mm.
Because without that story, you don't know if there really is danger that you're not supposed to know about. Do you see what I'm saying? If you're identifying with your parents and they have a fear that got built in, because if they had spoken up about anything spiritual, they probably would have been killed.
Mm.
So that gets passed along in the genetic matrix. And until you know what you know, you don't release it. I'm going to need to stop because I have to
Mhm.
think about what I need to do. I need to at least
That
find
was-
my files.
Thank you for the.
This was wonderful.
The battery's ticking down too. It's 4% of my laptop. I was worried we're going to lose the connection. So
Yeah, and I
Oh
know
my.
it's the discussion here, so
No,
hopefully someone,
questions are
everyone
perfect.
gets something out of this.
awesome. Well,
Okay, thank you all.
once again, good luck with your next session.
Thank you.
All right.
you.
See you later.
See you
Yeah,
soon.
bye.
Bye.